Chapter 1. The Invitation to Crimson Splendor. The envelope lay on the silver tray in Hercule Poirot's immaculate London flat, its heavy cream paper sealed with a blob of scarlet wax. The impression in the wax was a stylized letter H, entwined with a rose whose petals dripped like blood. Poirot lifted it delicately between thumb and forefinger, turning it over with the curiosity of a cat. "Mon ami," he murmured to Captain Hastings, who was polishing his golf clubs in the corner. "One does not receive such an invitation every day. Observe the quality of the paper, the depth of the embossing, the extravagance of the colour. It screams of wealth and perhaps of danger." Hastings glanced up. "Looks like a party invitation to me, old chap." Probably some society hostess wanting to show off by having the famous Hercule Poirot at her table. Poirot's green eyes glinted. Precisely. And yet Sir Reginald Hawthorne is not a hostess. He's a man who made his fortune in diamonds and railways. A man who collects enemies the way others collect stamps. Why, I ask you? Does he invite me to a banquet at his country seat, the Crimson Banquet Hall? He slit the envelope with a paper knife. The card inside was bordered in deep crimson, the lettering in raised gold. Sir Reginald Hawthorne requests the pleasure of the company of Monsieur Hercule Poirot at a banquet on Saturday, the 15th of October, at the Crimson Banquet Hall, Wiltshire. Carriages at 8 o'clock. A smaller note was enclosed, handwritten in a bold, impatient scrawl. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I have long admired your methods. Several distinguished guests will be present, and I should consider it a personal favour if you would join us. There may be matters of interest to a man of your profession. Yours sincerely, Reginald Hawthorne Poirot," twirled his moustache thoughtfully. "Matters of interest. Ah, that is the phrase that intrigues. It is not mere flattery. Sir Reginald anticipates something." 3 days later, Poirot's Daimler purred down the long avenue of ancient oaks that led to the Crimson Banquet Hall. The house rose before them like a Gothic vision. Tall chimneys, pointed gables, windows glowing ruby red against the dusk. Every pane seemed tinted, as though the entire mansion had been dipped in wine. Crimson ivy climbed the stone walls. Even the gravel of the drive appeared to have a reddish tint in the fading light. A liveried footman opened the car door. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald is expecting you." Inside, the entrance hall was a symphony of red. Persian rugs the colour of fresh blood, walls hung with damask silk, chandeliers dripping with Bohemian glass that scattered scarlet reflections across marble floors. Enormous arrangements of dark red roses filled the air with a heavy, almost funereal perfume. Poirot paused, inhaling. "Magnificent," he said softly, "and oppressive. One feels the pulse of the house is red." A tall woman in shimmering burgundy silk glided down the grand staircase. Lady Victoria Hawthorne was still beautiful at 45, with raven hair and eyes like polished jet. Yet there was a hardness about her mouth, a watchfulness in her gaze. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a gloved hand. "My husband is delighted you accepted. He speaks of you often." Poirot bowed over her hand. "The pleasure is mine, madame. Your home is unforgettable." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "We like to think it leaves an impression." As she led him towards the drawing room, other guests were already assembling. Dr. Elias Thorne, a thin, nervous man with pince-nez and a medical bag, he seemed reluctant to set down. Miss Amelia Fairchild, barely 20, golden-haired and trembling with excitement, heiress to a shipping fortune. Mr. Lionel Carver, a broad-shouldered businessman whose rivalry with Sir Reginald was whispered in the city. And finally, Mr. Julian Vale, a young artist whose dark, intense eyes lingered too long on every face, as though committing them to canvas. Sir Reginald himself entered last, a lion of a man in his 60s, white-haired, ruddy-cheeked, dressed in velvet dinner jacket the colour of dried blood. His voice boomed across the room. "Poirot! By heaven you came! Splendid!" He seized the detective's hand in a crushing grip. "I want you to meet everyone. We're a small party tonight, only the most interesting people." He drew Poirot aside for a moment, while the others sipped champagne. "I won't bore you with flattery," Sir Reginald said in a lower tone, "but I find myself surrounded by vultures, monsieur, smiling vultures. I intend to make an announcement after dinner about my will. There will be a surprise. I thought it wise to have a man of your discernment present, just in case." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "In case of what, monsieur?" Sir Reginald gave a short, humourless laugh. "In case someone decides they cannot wait for nature to take its course." Before Poirot could reply, a gong sounded, deep, resonant, vibrating through the crimson corridors. Dinner was served. The dining hall was the heart of the mansion's extravagance. A vast chamber with a vaulted ceiling painted the colour of arterial blood. A single long table of polished mahogany stretched beneath 3 enormous chandeliers, each hung with hundreds of ruby crystals that scattered light like drops of blood across white damask and silver. Place settings gleamed, gold-rimmed plates, crystal goblets tinted rose, napkins folded into the shape of blooming roses. The guests took their places. Poirot found himself seated between Miss Fairchild and Mr. Vale. Across the table, Lady Victoria presided at the foot, while Sir Reginald occupied the head like a monarch. Footmen in crimson livery moved silently, serving the first course, consommé the colour of garnets, followed by salmon poached in red wine. Conversation flowed, light at first, then edged. Mr. Carver spoke loudly of stock prices and hostile takeovers. Dr. Thorne murmured about new treatments for nervous disorders. Miss Fairchild blushed whenever Sir Reginald addressed her, which was often. Julian Vale said little, but his gaze darted from face to face, as though sketching mental portraits. Poirot observed everything. He noted how Lady Victoria's fingers tightened around her wineglass when her husband praised Miss Fairchild's youth and vitality. How Dr. Thorne's hand shook slightly as he passed the salt to Mr. Carver. How Mr. Vale slipped a small sketchbook from his pocket beneath the table and made rapid strokes with a pencil. The courses succeeded one another in opulent procession. Pheasant in morello cherry sauce, beef tornadoes with a reduction of port and blackberries, each dish richer and redder than the last. Wines were poured, deep burgundy, vintage claret, until the very air seemed saturated with crimson. At one point, Sir Reginald raised his glass. "To old friends," he said, "and to new beginnings." The toast was drunk, but Poirot noticed that not every smile reached the eyes. As dessert was served, a towering gâteau layered with raspberry crème and glazed with scarlet fondant. Sir Reginald leaned back in his chair. "After dinner," he announced, "I have something important to share with you all. Something that will change everything." A hush fell. Even the footman seemed to pause. Lady Victoria's voice cut the silence like a blade. "Reginald, dear, must we discuss business tonight?" He smiled indulgently. "It is not business, my love. It is family." Miss Fairchild gave a small, nervous laugh. Dr. Thorne adjusted his pince-nez. Mr. Carver drained his glass in one gulp. Poirot sat very still, his little grey cells alert. The crimson light from the chandeliers played across every face, turning smiles into masks, eyes into pools of shadow. Outside, a wind rose, rattling the tall windows. Inside, the banquet continued, exquisite and dangerous, beneath the watchful gaze of Hercule Poirot. And in the heavy perfume of roses and wine and impending revelation, no one yet noticed the faint, almost imperceptible scent of something metallic, something that might, in a few hours' time, mingle horribly with the crimson splendour of the hall. Chapter 2. Shadows over the Scarlet Feast. The banquet had reached its zenith. Footmen in crimson livery moved like silent shadows, clearing away the remnants of the beef tornadoes and pouring a final, magnificent wine, Chateau d'Yquem 1900, its colour a deep, glowing amber that caught the ruby light of the chandeliers and turned almost blood-red in the crystal goblets. Sir Reginald Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with satisfaction, and perhaps a touch too much port. He tapped his glass lightly with a spoon, the clear ring cutting through the murmur of conversation. "My friends," he began, his voice rich and resonant, "before we retire to the drawing-room, I wish to say a few words." Every eye turned toward him. Lady Victoria's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the stem of her glass. Dr. Thorne adjusted his pince-nez for the third time in as many minutes. Miss Amelia Fairchild leaned forward, her cheeks pink with excitement and wine. Only Julian Vale, the artist, seemed detached, his dark eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the table, as he idly traced patterns on the damask cloth with a dessert fork. Sir Reginald smiled indulgently at them all. "You are the people closest to me in the world, some by blood, some by long association, some—" his gaze lingered on Amelia, "by more recent ties. Tonight I wish to speak of the future, of my legacy." A faint rustle passed around the table, like wind through dry leaves. "I have recently revised my will," he continued, his tone almost casual. "There will be changes, significant changes. I intend to reveal the details tomorrow morning, in the presence of my solicitor. But I wanted you all to know tonight that certain expectations may be disappointed." Mr. Lionel Carver, the businessman, set down his glass with a sharp click. "I say, Hawthorne, is this the place for such announcements? We're celebrating, not attending a reading of the book." Sir Reginald raised a hand, still smiling. "Merely a heads-up, Carver. Nothing more. I believe in transparency among friends." Lady Victoria's voice was cool as iced wine. "Reginald, darling, perhaps we might leave business until daylight. The night is for pleasure." Her husband inclined his head. "As you wish, my dear, but the seed is planted." He lifted his goblet. "To the future, whatever it may hold." The toast was drunk, but the atmosphere had shifted. Laughter now sounded forced. Glances were sharper, more searching. Hercule Poirot, seated quietly between Amelia and Julian Vale, observed everything with the calm detachment of a man watching a well-rehearsed play. He noted how Dr. Thorne's left hand trembled as he reached for his water-glass, how Carver's jaw worked as though chewing on unspoken words, how Lady Victoria's eyes, black and brilliant, flicked from her husband to Amelia and back again. Conversation resumed, but it was fragmented, brittle. Amelia chattered nervously about the latest Paris fashions. Julian Vale murmured something about the symbolic power of the colour red in Renaissance painting. Poirot himself engaged Dr. Thorne on the subject of modern toxicology, watching closely as the doctor's responses grew increasingly guarded. "Poison," Poirot said lightly, "is so often the weapon of the timid N'est-ce pas? No confrontation, no risk of failure in the heat of passion. Dr. Thorne gave a thin smile. Quite, though modern detection methods have made it a rather foolish choice. Yet fools persist, Poirot replied softly. At that moment, the lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the entire hall into sudden absolute darkness. A collective gasp rose, a glass overturned, wine splashing across the cloth. Amelia gave a small cry. Someone, Carver, Poirot thought, cursed under his breath. "Steady, everyone!" Sir Reginald's voice boomed from the head of the table. "Probably just a faulty connection. The generator will kick in." For 10 long seconds there was only darkness and the sound of quickened breathing. Poirot sat motionless, his senses alert. He heard the faint scrape of a chair, the rustle of silk, a soft footfall somewhere to his left. Then, abruptly, the chandeliers blazed back to life. Everything appeared unchanged. The table gleamed as before, the crimson glow bathing every face. Yet Poirot's sharp eyes missed nothing. A white kid glove, Lady Victoria's, lay discarded on the floor near Dr. Thorne's chair. A folded slip of paper, previously absent, now rested beside Sir Reginald's plate. And Julian Vale's sketchbook, which had been closed throughout dinner, now lay open, a single page hastily torn out. Sir Reginald picked up the slip of paper, unfolded it, and frowned. Whatever was written there caused his ruddy colour to deepen alarmingly. He crumpled the note and slipped it into his pocket without a word. "Merely a fuse," he said briskly. "Nothing to concern ourselves with. Shall we take coffee in the drawing-room?" The party rose, chairs scraping against the marble floor. As they moved toward the double doors, Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the table one last time. Near Miss Fairchild's place, half hidden beneath a napkin, glinted something small and metallic. A lady's earring, a single ruby drop. Yet Amelia was wearing both of hers. Poirot stooped swiftly, palming the jewel before straightening. He glanced at Amelia. She was laughing at something Carver had said, seemingly unaware of any loss. In the drawing-room, coffee was served in delicate Sèvres cups. The room continued the crimson theme. Walls hung with scarlet brocade. A vast fireplace where flames danced like living rubies. The guests grouped and regrouped, conversations low and intense. Poirot found himself momentarily alone near the grand piano. He opened his hand. The ruby earring lay there, warm from his skin. A pretty thing, but not, he thought, particularly valuable. Then why leave it behind? From across the room, Sir Reginald was speaking earnestly to Julian Vale. The artist listened, head bowed, but his fingers worked nervously at the cuff of his sleeve. Lady Victoria stood apart by the window, staring out into the black night, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Dr. Thorne approached Poirot, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "An extraordinary house, monsieur," the doctor said, offering 1 cup. "Almost oppressive in its richness, wouldn't you say?" Poirot accepted the coffee with a polite murmur. "It reflects the personality of its owner. Bold, dramatic, unafraid of excess." Thorne lowered his voice. "Sir Reginald has been unwell lately. Nothing serious, but he tires easily. I've advised rest." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yet he chooses to host a banquet and announce changes to his will. Curious timing, none? The doctor hesitated. He's a man who likes to keep others guessing. At that moment, a sharp exchange rose near the fireplace. Carver's voice, loud and accusatory. "I've put years into that African railway scheme, Hawthorne. If you think you can freeze me out now." Sir Reginald's reply was calm but edged with steel. "Business is business, Lionel, nothing personal." Lady Victoria turned from the window, her face pale. "Gentlemen, please, This is neither the time nor the place." The argument subsided, but the tension remained, thick as the smoke curling from the fire. Poirot sipped his coffee, watching, waiting. The little grey cells were already busy, arranging observations into patterns. Suddenly, Sir Reginald clutched at his chest, his face contorting. He took one unsteady step forward, knocking over a small table. Crystal shattered. Coffee splashed across the crimson carpet like dark blood. "Reginald!" Lady Victoria cried, rushing to his side. He waved her away weakly, managing a strained laugh. "Indigestion. Too much of that damned rich food. I'll be fine." But as footman helped him to a chair, Poirot saw the truth in his eyes. Fear. Real fear. The evening ended soon after. Guests retired early, excuses murmured. Sir Reginald, supported by Dr. Thorne, withdrew to his study with a promise to rest. As Poirot climbed the grand staircase to his guest room, he paused on the landing. Below, in the entrance hall, a single crimson light still burned. For a moment, he thought he saw movement. A figure slipping into the shadows near the dining room doors. He waited, but nothing stirred. In his room, Poirot carefully placed the ruby earring on the dressing table beside his comb and brushes. Then he sat in the armchair by the window, hands steepled beneath his chin. The game, he reflected, had begun earlier than expected. The darkness during dinner, the mysterious note, the discarded glove, the earring, the overheard threats, all pieces of a puzzle not yet formed. And Sir Reginald Hawthorne, for all his bravado, was a man who sensed his own mortality drawing close. Outside, the wind moaned through the ancient oaks. Inside the crimson banquet hall, the shadows lengthened, and somewhere in the silence, a clock struck midnight. Poirot closed his eyes. But sleep was far away. The little grey cells were already turning. And then, from somewhere deep within the house, came a sound, a muffled cry, abruptly cut off. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his dressing gown. The scarlet feast was over. The night of crimson shadows had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Crimson Stain of Death. The muffled cry Poirot had heard from the landing had come from the direction of the study. He moved swiftly but silently down the corridor, dressing gown tied, patent leather shoes exchanged for soft bedroom slippers that made no sound on the thick carpet. Behind him, other doors began to open. Sleepy, alarmed faces appeared in the crimson glow of the wall sconces. Poirot reached the study first. The heavy oak door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the room was lit only by the dying embers in the grate and a single green-shaded desk lamp. Sir Reginald Hawthorne lay sprawled across the Persian rug in front of his desk, one arm flung wide, the other clutching at the front of his velvet dinner jacket. A dark, glistening stain spread across his chest, too dark, too thick to be spilled wine. Poirot stepped inside and knelt beside the body. The wound was small, almost neat, a single stab just below the breastbone, angled upward. The blade had not been withdrawn. A slender, ornamental dagger with a ruby-encrusted hilt still protruded from Sir Reginald's chest. Blood had soaked the crimson waistcoat and pooled beneath him, darkening the already scarlet rug, until the two colours merged in a horrible unity. Poirot touched the dead man's carotid artery with 2 fingers. Nothing. He straightened, eyes sweeping the room with the speed and precision of a camera shutter. The desk chair had been overturned. A crystal decanter of brandy lay shattered on the hearth, its contents mingling with the embers. On the desk itself lay an open ledger, a fountain pen still uncapped, and, most curiously, a single sheet of paper on which someone had scrawled, in bold capitals, "You will pay tonight." The handwriting was hurried but firm. Footsteps pounded along the corridor. Lady Victoria burst through the doorway, still in her burgundy evening gown, hair half loose. She stopped dead when she saw her husband. "Reginald!" The word came out in a strangled gasp. She dropped to her knees beside the body, heedless of the spreading blood, and reached for his face. Poirot gently but firmly caught her wrists. "Madame, I am afraid he is gone." She stared at him blankly for a moment, then wrenched her hands free and pressed her fingers to Sir Reginald's throat herself. A low, keening sound escaped her. It was not theatrical. It was the raw grief of someone who had suddenly realized the finality of loss. Behind her, the other guests crowded into the doorway. Dr. Thorne, pale and trembling, Lionel Carver still in his dinner jacket, face flushed with shock. Amelia Fairchild, clutching a silk shawl to her chest, eyes wide with horror. Julian Vale, silent, sketchbook dangling forgotten from one hand. Dr. Thorne pushed forward. "Let me see him." He knelt opposite Poirot, made a brief examination, then sat back on his heels. Stab wound to the heart. Death would have been almost instantaneous. Poirot nodded. "The dagger is still in place. We must leave it so until the police arrive." "Police!" Carver barked. "Good God, man, we're in the middle of Wiltshire. The local constable will take an hour to get here." "Nevertheless," Poirot said calmly, "the police must be summoned, and the room must be secured. No one must touch anything." Lady Victoria rose unsteadily to her feet. Her hands were stained with her husband's blood. She stared at them as though they belonged to someone else. Who could have done this? No one answered. Poirot turned to the butler, who had appeared silently in the doorway. "Simmons, is it? Please telephone the police immediately. Tell them there has been a murder at the Crimson Banquet Hall. Ask for Inspector Japp if he is available. He knows my methods." The butler bowed and disappeared. Poirot addressed the stunned group. "Mesdames et messieurs, I regret that we must remain here until the authorities arrive. No one is to leave the house. For the moment, let us move to the drawing room. It will be more comfortable, and we will not disturb the scene." They obeyed numbly, filing out like sleepwalkers. Poirot was the last to leave. Before closing the door, he took one final look at the body in the room. The green lamp cast a sickly glow over the corpse. The ruby hilt of the dagger caught the light and flashed once like a malevolent eye. In the drawing room, the fire had burned low. Footmen had hastily lit more lamps, but the crimson walls seemed to drink the light, leaving the room dim and oppressive. The guests sat or stood in awkward clusters, none meeting anyone else's eyes. Amelia Fairchild had begun to cry softly, great tears rolling down her cheeks. Julian Vale stood beside her, offering awkward pats on the shoulder without quite touching her. Carver paced like a caged animal. Dr. Thorne sat with his medical bag open on his lap, as though hoping some professional action might still be possible. Lady Victoria stood apart, staring into the fire, her blood-stained hands clasped tightly in front of her. Poirot moved quietly among them, observing. He noted that Lady Victoria's gown was torn at the hem, as though she had caught it while running. Dr. Thorne's cuffs were speckled with small drops of blood, possibly from examining the body, possibly not. Carver's knuckles were white where he gripped the back of a chair. Amelia's ruby earring was missing from her right ear. The left one still glittered in the lamplight. A few minutes later, the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of the police. Inspector James Japp strode into the drawing room, hat in hand, his raincoat dripping. Behind him came 2 constables and a police surgeon carrying a black bag. "Poirot!" Japp exclaimed with genuine relief. "They told me you were here. Thank heaven for small mercies." He shook Poirot's hand vigorously. "Right then, where's the deceased?" Poirot led him to the study, explaining briefly what he had found. Japp listened, nodding, while the police surgeon knelt to make his examination. "Stabbed once, clean through the heart," the surgeon confirmed after a moment. "Weapon left in situ. Death between 30 minutes and an hour ago, I'd say." Japp looked at Poirot. "You've secured the scene?" "Oui, and I have made certain observations." Japp grunted. "Thought you might have. Well, let's have the lot of them in here one by one, starting with the wife." Lady Victoria was summoned first. She answered Japp's questions in a low, controlled voice. She had retired to her room shortly after her husband went to the study. She had heard nothing until Poirot's footsteps in the corridor and the cry. She had no idea who might have wished her husband harm. Poirot listened from the corner, saying nothing. Next came Dr. Thorne. He admitted he had followed Sir Reginald to the study to check on his condition after the earlier collapse. They had spoken for perhaps 5 minutes. Sir Reginald had seemed agitated but not unwell. Thorne had left him alone and returned to the drawing room. He had not seen anyone else enter or leave the study. Carver was belligerent. "Of course I didn't kill the man. We had words earlier." "Yes, but business words." "I was in the billiard room smoking a cigar when it happened. Ask the footman. He brought me a whiskey." Amelia Fairchild could barely speak through her tears. She had gone straight to her room after leaving the drawing room. She had heard nothing. She had loved Sir Reginald like a father. Julian Vale was the calmest of them all. He had gone to the library to sketch by firelight. He had heard the cry and come running like everyone else. When the last interview was finished, Japp drew Poirot aside in the corridor. "Locked room, more or less," he muttered. "Doors were watched by servants after dinner. Windows locked from the inside. No secret passages that we can find so far. And a house full of people with motives." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet, mon ami, it is not quite a locked room mystery." Japp raised an eyebrow. "No, because the dagger—" Poirot paused, eyes narrowing. "The dagger is not the murder weapon." Japp stared. "What?" Poirot gestured toward the study door. "Come, I will show you." They re-entered the room. The body still lay where it had fallen. Poirot knelt once more and pointed to the small, neat wound. "Look closely, Inspector. The blade has entered at a very precise angle, almost perfectly vertical. Yet the dagger itself is long, almost 9 inches, and the hilt is heavy with rubies. If a man were stabbed with such a weapon in passion, the angle would be different, more slanted, more forceful." He lifted the dead man's right hand gently. "And observe the fingers. There are no defense wounds, no marks of struggle. Sir Reginald did not try to stop the blow." Japp frowned. "You're saying he was already dead when he was stabbed?" "Précisément. The dagger was placed after death, almost certainly to mislead. The true cause of death lies elsewhere." He pointed to the small wineglass that stood on the desk, half full of dark red liquid. "I would suggest, Inspector, that we send this to be analysed immediately, and I would further suggest that we look very carefully at the contents of Sir Reginald's stomach." Japp exhaled slowly. "Poison." Poirot inclined his head. "It is possible, and if so, then the dagger is merely a spectacular red herring." He looked down at the body, at the crimson stain that had spread so far it had almost reached the toes of his own slippers. "Someone wished us to see blood," he murmured. "Someone wished us to think of violence, of sudden passion. But the truth, I suspect, is colder, more calculated, more crimson." Outside the study window, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to touch the Wiltshire hills. Inside the Crimson Banquet Hall, the night's horror was only just beginning to reveal its true shape. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Ruby Corridor's Dawn had barely crept over the Wiltshire hills when Hercule Poirot descended the grand staircase of the Crimson Banquet Hall. The house was unnaturally quiet. Even the servants moved on hushed feet, as though the very walls mourned Sir Reginald Hawthorne. Crimson draperies still hung heavy at every window, turning the pale morning light into a sullen, blood-like glow. Inspector Japp had taken over the library as his temporary headquarters. Uniformed constables stood at every external door. The study remained sealed, awaiting the arrival of forensic experts from London. The guests had been asked, politely but firmly, to remain in their rooms until called for further questioning. Poirot, however, had no intention of remaining idle. He began with the ruby corridors themselves, those long, narrow passages on the upper floors, lined with dark red silk wallpaper and lit by ruby glass sconces. The effect was oppressive, almost womb-like, and it encouraged whispers. Sound carried strangely here. A murmur in one room could drift to another like smoke. Poirot walked slowly, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning every detail. He noted the faint scuff marks on the polished floorboards outside Dr. Thorne's door, suggesting hurried movement. A single strand of golden hair caught on the carved newel post near Amelia Fairchild's room. And most intriguing, a small smear of what appeared to be dried blood on the crimson wallpaper outside Lady Victoria's suite. Too high to be accidental, too small to be noticed by a casual glance. He paused there, tilting his head. The smear was at the exact height of a man's shoulder. Someone had brushed against the wall while carrying something, or while fleeing. A soft footfall behind him made him turn. Julian Vale, the artist, stood in the shadows, sketchbook tucked beneath his arm. He looked pale and sleepless, his dark hair dishevelled. "Couldn't sleep," Vale said quietly. "Kept seeing. That image, the dagger, the blood." Poirot regarded him with sympathy. "It is a shocking thing, monsieur, but you are an artist. You observe life in all its aspects, even the tragic ones." Vale gave a faint, bitter smile. "Sir Reginald commissioned several portraits from me over the past year. He liked to think of himself as a patron of the arts, paid generously too." He hesitated. "He also asked me to embellish certain details, make his wife appear younger, omit certain background figures in family scenes." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Falsify reality, in fact. If you like." Vale glanced up and down the corridor. "There are things in this house that were never meant to be seen. Hidden doors, secret drawers. Sir Reginald was fond of concealment." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You know of such places." Vale nodded toward a section of wall panelled in dark oak, almost invisible against the red silk. "There, behind the tapestry of the hunt." Poirot lifted the heavy fabric. Concealed beneath was a narrow door, no taller than a man's shoulder. It opened silently at his touch, revealing a steep, dusty staircase spiralling downward. "A servant's passage?" Poirot murmured. "More than that," Vale replied. "It leads to the old wine cellar and to a door that opens directly into the study." Poirot's expression did not change, but his little grey cells whirred. "You have used this passage?" "Once or twice, to deliver sketches without disturbing the household." Vale's voice dropped. "Last night, after the lights came back on in the dining room, I thought I heard footsteps on those stairs. Soft, quick, then nothing." Poirot thanked him gravely and watched the artist retreat to his room. Then he descended the hidden staircase alone. The passage was narrow and airless, smelling of stone and old wine. At the bottom, a second door, unlocked, opened into a dimly lit corridor that indeed connected to the study. Poirot examined the lock. No scratches, no signs of forcing. Whoever had used this route had done so with ease. Emerging into the study, now guarded by a young constable who sprang to attention, Poirot made a circuit of the room. He noted the position of the overturned chair, the shattered decanter, the threatening note still lying on the desk. Then he knelt beside the body, now covered respectfully with a sheet, and examined the ruby-handled dagger once more. The hilt was warm to the touch. Odd, after hours of death. He withdrew a pocket lens and studied the rubies closely. One stone, slightly larger than the rest, was loose. With delicate fingers he twisted it. The stone popped free, revealing a tiny hollow beneath, empty. Poirot replaced the stone and rose, thoughtful. A hiding place for something small, a pill perhaps, or a few grains of poison. He left the study and sought out Lady Victoria. She received him in her private sitting room, a chamber as crimson as the rest of the house, but softened by feminine touches. Lace at the windows, a bowl of dark red roses wilting on a side table. She had changed into a severe black morning dress, her face pale but composed. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "I must ask you some questions of a delicate nature." She inclined her head. "Ask what you must, Monsieur Poirot. I want my husband's murderer found." He seated himself opposite her. "You were aware, perhaps, that Sir Reginald intended to alter his will?" Her lips tightened. "He mentioned it. He was capricious in such matters. And you feared the changes might not be in your favour." A flash of anger crossed her face. "I have been his wife for 20 years. I have managed this house, endured his moods, his infidelities." She stopped abruptly. "Yes, I feared he might leave the bulk of his fortune to that simpering girl." "Miss Fairchild." Lady Victoria's laugh was brittle. "She is barely older than our daughter would have been. He doted on her shamelessly." Poirot leaned forward. "And Dr. Thorne? What is his connection?" She hesitated. "Elias has been our family physician for years. He knew certain things about Reginald's health, things that could have been embarrassing if made public. Blackmail. I prefer to call it professional discretion." Her eyes met Poirot's steadily. "Reginald paid him well to keep silent about a certain weakness of the heart." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet last night, after the banquet, your husband appeared robust." "Appearances can deceive." She rose abruptly. "If you will excuse me, monsieur, I have arrangements to make." Poirot bowed and withdrew. His next interview was with Dr. Thorne in the doctor's temporary room. The physician looked haggard, his pince-nez slipping down his nose. "I prescribed digitalis for Sir Reginald's heart condition," Thorne admitted when pressed. "A delicate balance, too much, and," he spread his hands, "you visited him in the study last night." "For barely 5 minutes. He complained of palpitations after dinner. I advised rest. He laughed and poured himself a brandy. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The decanter that was later found shattered? Thorne paled. Yes, I warned him against it. And the threatening note on his desk? I saw no note. Poirot changed tack. You carry a medical bag, Doctor. May I see it? Reluctantly, Thorne opened the bag. Vials, syringes, ampules, everything in order. But Poirot's keen eye spotted a small, empty space where a vial might have fitted. Something is missing. Thorne shook his head too quickly. No, everything is accounted for. Poirot did not press further, for now. He found Lionel Carver in the billiard room, savagely potting balls as though each were an enemy's head. Hawthorne owed me a fortune, Carver burst out when Poirot entered. That African railway deal, he promised me a partnership, then threatened to sell to foreigners. Ruination for me if he changed his will. And yet you claim to have been here alone when the murder occurred. Carver slammed his cue down. Ask the footman. He brought me whiskey at 11:30. I never left this room. Poirot murmured something soothing and departed. Finally, he sought Amelia Fairchild. She was in the conservatory among dying palms, her pretty face swollen with crying. I didn't want his money, she sobbed when Poirot sat beside her. I truly cared for him. He was kind to me when no one else was. And the earring found near your place at table. She touched her ear instinctively. I lost it during the blackout. I was frightened, reached out for support, and it must have come loose. Support from whom? She blushed crimson. From Mr. Vale. He was sitting beside me. Poirot filed the information away. As evening drew in once more, Poirot requested that all the guests and senior staff assemble in the drawing-room. Inspector Japp, bleary-eyed but attentive, stood beside him. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, we have established that Sir Reginald was poisoned, most likely with an overdose of his own heart medication. Before the dagger was inserted to create confusion, the poison was administered in the study, after the banquet. The question is, who had opportunity? He paused, letting the silence stretch. Several of you have alibis that do not withstand scrutiny. A secret passage connects the upper floors to the study. Footprints, hair, bloodstains, all point to movement in the night. Gasps rippled through the room. But more importantly, Poirot continued, someone in this house knew Sir Reginald's heart condition intimately. Someone who could calculate the exact dose needed to kill without immediate suspicion. His gaze swept over them. Lady Victoria's rigid composure, Dr. Thorne's nervous twitching, Carver's scowl, Amelia's tears, Vale's watchful silence. Tomorrow, Poirot said softly, we shall reconstruct the events of last night. And I believe the murderer will reveal themselves. He bowed slightly and left the room. In the ruby corridor outside, a grandfather clock struck 9. Somewhere in the great house, a door closed softly. Poirot paused, listening. The whispers in the ruby corridors had grown louder, and one of them, he was certain, was the voice of the killer. Chapter 5. The Blood-Red Alibis. The morning after the second night of confinement dawned grey and drizzly, the Wiltshire sky pressing low over the crimson banquet hall like a damp woolen shroud. Inside, the crimson decorations that had once seemed opulent now felt suffocating, as though the house itself were bleeding slowly into the carpets and walls. At 10 o'clock precisely, Hercule Poirot assembled everyone in the long dining hall where the fatal banquet had taken place. The great table had been cleared of its glittering debris. Only a pristine white cloth now covered it, with chairs arranged in a semicircle at one end. Inspector Japp stood by the double doors, arms folded, while 2 constables waited discreetly in the corridor. The suspects filed in with varying degrees of reluctance. Lady Victoria entered first, dressed in unrelieved black, her face pale but composed. Dr. Elias Thorne followed, clutching his medical bag as though it were a shield. Lionel Carver strode in aggressively, jaw set. Amelia Fairchild came next, eyes red-rimmed, supported gently by Julian Vale, whose expression remained unreadable. Poirot waited until they were all seated, then took his place at the head of the table. He placed a small silver pocket watch before him and regarded the assembly with calm authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice crisp in the hushed room, "today we shall examine the matter of alibis. Each of you has claimed to have been elsewhere when Sir Reginald was poisoned in his study. We shall test those claims one by one." He turned first to Lionel Carver. "Monsieur Carver, you stated that after leaving the drawing room, you went directly to the billiard room, where a footman brought you whisky at approximately 11:30. Is this correct?" Carver nodded brusquely. "Absolutely. I was alone, but the footman will confirm the time." Poirot inclined his head. "The footman does confirm it. Yet the billiard-room clock was found to be 17 minutes fast. When adjusted, your whisky was served at 11:47. The police surgeon places the time of death between 11:20 and 11:50. You therefore have no witness for the crucial half-hour." Carver's face flushed dark red. "That's absurd. I was potting balls the entire time." Poirot continued mildly. "And yet no balls were found scattered on the table when the room was checked this morning. The baize was unmarked. A man practicing alone for 30 minutes would surely have left some trace." Carver opened his mouth, then closed it again, glaring. Poirot turned to Dr. Thorne. "Docteur, you admit to visiting Sir Reginald in the study shortly after the party dispersed. You claim to have left him alive and well at approximately 11:15, then returned to your room." Thorne nodded nervously. "That is correct. Yet the housemaid, passing along the ruby corridor at 11:25, saw your door firmly closed and heard no movement within. Furthermore, your medical bag, examined this morning with your permission, contains a vial of digitalis with a fingerprint smudge on the label. The smudge overlays a small drop of brandy, the same brandy Sir Reginald drank in the study." Thorne went very white. I often handle the vial after dinner. It proves nothing." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, "but it raises questions." He moved on to Amelia Fairchild. "Mademoiselle, you say you retired directly to your room and heard nothing until the general alarm." Amelia dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "That's true. I was distraught after the evening. I took a sleeping powder and lay down fully dressed." Poirot's gaze was gentle. "Yet the earring we found beneath the dining table, your earring, was not lost during the blackout, as you suggested. The clasp is bent inward, as though deliberately removed, and Mr. Vale has confirmed that during the darkness you were clutching his arm quite tightly, yet he felt no tug at your ear." Amelia's tears stopped abruptly. She looked at Vale, who avoided her eyes. Poirot continued. "Moreover, the sleeping powder bottle in your room contains only 6 tablets, yet the prescription was filled for 20 only last week. 14 are unaccounted for." I may have miscounted," she whispered. Next, Julian Vale. "Monsieur Vale, you claim to have spent the fatal hour in the library sketching by firelight." Vale nodded. "I did. The fire was low but sufficient." Poirot produced a small leather-bound sketchbook, Vale's own. "This book was found on the library table. The top sheet shows a detailed study of the fireplace, dated last night, yet the graphite is barely smudged. A sketch made by firelight, with constant movement of the hand, would show considerable rubbing. This page is pristine, as though drawn in steady lamplight elsewhere and placed in the library later. Vale's dark eyes flickered. An artist's hands are trained to be precise. Précisément, Poirot agreed, but not infallible. Finally, he turned to Lady Victoria. Madam, you state that you retired to your suite immediately after leaving the drawing-room, and remained there until hearing the cry. Lady Victoria met his gaze steadily. That is correct. Poirot held up a single white kid glove, stained faintly with blood at the fingertips. This glove was found this morning, hidden behind a cushion in the morning room. It is your glove, madame. The pair to the one discovered on the dining floor after the blackout. The blood matches your husband's type. Yet you told Inspector Japp you had not entered the study at any time last night. Lady Victoria's composure cracked for the first time. I went to him later. After Dr. Thorne left, Reginald was agitated about the will. We argued. He clutched at his chest and collapsed. I tried to revive him. I got blood on my glove then, but he was already dead. I panicked and fled. A murmur ran through the room. Poirot raised a hand for silence. You touched the body after death, madame. That explains the blood, but it does not explain the poison. He turned back to the entire group. Let us reconstruct the timeline with precision. He rose and moved to the sideboard where several items had been laid out. The poisoned brandy glass from the study, the threatening note, the ruby-handled dagger, the bent earring, the stained glove, and most significantly, a small crystal vial containing a few remaining drops of clear liquid. This vial, Poirot announced, was recovered from the secret passage behind the Hunt tapestry. It contained digitalis in concentrated solution sufficient to kill within minutes when added to brandy. He looked at Dr. Thorne. The missing vial from your bag. Docteur. Thorne half rose. I swear I did not, Poirot continued inexorably. The poison was administered between 11:20 and 11:40. During that window, Monsieur Carver had no true witness. Dr. Thorne's room appeared unoccupied. Mademoiselle Fairchild's sleeping powders cannot be accounted for. Monsieur Vale's sketch was fabricated. Madame Hawthorne admits to entering the study after death, but not before. He paused, letting the weight settle. Yet one piece does not fit. The threatening note, "You will pay tonight," was written in block capitals. I have samples of each of your handwriting. None matches exactly. But when I examined the wastepaper basket in the morning room, I found a crumpled sheet with similar block letters. Practice, perhaps. He produced the crumpled sheet and laid it beside the note. The ink is identical. The pressure of the pen is identical. But most telling, the letter Y in both has a distinctive flourish on the tail. A flourish I have seen only in one person's casual handwriting. All eyes turned to Julian Vale. The artist sat very still, his face suddenly drained of colour. Poirot's voice was almost sorrowful. You, monsieur, wrote the note. You placed it on the desk after Sir Reginald was already dead. To direct suspicion toward passion or revenge, but why? Vale's hands clenched on the table. You can't prove. I can, Poirot interrupted gently, because the ruby dagger, the theatrical touch, was taken from your own travelling case. The matching scabbard was found hidden in your room this morning. You staged the stabbing to create confusion, knowing the true cause was poison. Vale looked around wildly, but there was no escape. Poirot continued, Your motive? Sir Reginald had discovered that several old masters he purchased through you were clever forgeries, your own work. He threatened exposure, ruin. You could not allow the will to be changed in favour of Miss Fairchild, for then the forgeries might be uncovered by new executors. You poisoned him, staged the dramatic scene, and planted false trails. Vale's head dropped. He laughed at me, he whispered, said I was no better than a common criminal, after all I had done for him. Lady Victoria gave a choked cry. Amelia began to sob again. Carver swore under his breath. Dr. Thorne simply stared, as though a great weight had lifted. Inspector Japp stepped forward. Julian Vale, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Hawthorne. As the constable moved to handcuff the artist, Poirot stood quietly, his little grey cells at rest at last. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. A weak ray of sunlight pierced the crimson-stained windows of the dining hall, falling across the white tablecloth like a pale, bloodless wound. The alibis, those fragile blood-red lies, had crumbled at last. Chapter 6. Echoes from the Crimson Vault. The arrest of Julian Vale should have brought calm to the Crimson Banquet Hall, yet an uneasy restlessness lingered in the air. Inspector Japp had taken the artist away for formal charging, but Hercule Poirot remained. His little grey cells, far from satisfied, whispered that certain threads still dangled loose in the tapestry of the crime. Late that afternoon, as rain lashed the tall windows and the crimson draperies seemed to weep, Poirot requested permission from Lady Victoria to examine the family vault beneath the east wing. She granted it with weary indifference, pressing a heavy iron key into his hand. The vault has not been opened since Reginald's father died 20 years ago, she said. There is nothing there but dust and old papers. Poirot bowed. Dust and old papers, madame, are often the most eloquent witnesses. Accompanied by a silent footman carrying an electric torch, Poirot descended a narrow stone staircase hidden behind a panel in the library. The air grew colder and damper with every step. At the bottom, a stout oak door bound with iron bands confronted them. The lock grated protestingly as the key turned. Inside, the vault was larger than Poirot had expected. A long barrel-vaulted chamber painted, inevitably, in deep crimson, though time and damp had mottled the colour to the shade of dried blood. Iron-bound chests lined the walls. A massive safe squatted in one corner. In the centre stood a mahogany pedestal upon which rested a single leather-bound volume, the Hawthorne family ledger, its pages yellowed and curling. Poirot began methodically. He opened chests filled with deeds, share certificates, and bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. In one, he found a miniature portrait of a young woman with striking resemblance to Amelia Fairchild, dated 1902, and signed on the back, "To my darling brother Reginald, from your loving sister Eliza." Beneath it lay a death certificate. Eliza Hawthorne, aged 22, died in childbirth, the child stillborn. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Sir Reginald had never mentioned a sister. In another chest he discovered a sealed envelope addressed in a woman's hand to my son. The seal had been broken long ago. Inside was a letter dated 1903, pleading for recognition and financial help for a child named Amelia. The signature, Eliza Fairchild, evidently having survived under a new name. Poirot folded the letter carefully. So Amelia was Sir Reginald's niece, perhaps the true heir he had intended to acknowledge in his new will. But it was the great safe that yielded the most startling discovery. The combination, provided reluctantly by Lady Victoria, was the date of her marriage. Inside, among stacks of bonds and jewel cases, lay a small ebony box. Poirot opened it with gloved fingers. Nestled on faded velvet was a second ruby-handled dagger, identical to the one embedded in Sir Reginald's chest, save that its blade was clean and its largest ruby firmly fixed. Poirot examined the hilt closely. The central ruby, when twisted, revealed the same hidden compartment. This one was not empty. Inside lay a single folded slip of paper. He unfolded it beneath the torchlight. Written in Sir Reginald's bold scrawl were the words, "If I die unnaturally, suspect J.V. He knows too much about the forgeries." And about E. Poirot exhaled slowly. So Sir Reginald had suspected Vale and had prepared this accusation as insurance. Yet the note raised new questions. Why had Vale not removed it? Had he not known of the vault? Or had someone else placed the dagger in the study to incriminate him? Poirot returned upstairs deep in thought. He sought out Dr. Thorne, whom he found in the morning room, staring morosely at the rain. "Doctor," Poirot began without preamble, "you told me Sir Reginald suffered from a weakness of the heart. Yet the post-mortem revealed no organic disease, only the effects of massive digitalis overdose." Thorne started. I may have exaggerated the severity. He had occasional palpitations. I prescribed digitalis prophylactically." "And profited by the prescription?" Poirot suggested gently. Thorne flushed. "He paid me a retainer to keep certain matters confidential. His sister's survival, the child. He feared scandal." Poirot nodded. "And Miss Fairchild? Did she know her true parentage?" "I believe not. Sir Reginald intended to tell her the night of the banquet, after announcing the new will." A piece clicked into place. That evening, Poirot gathered the remaining household: Lady Victoria, Dr. Thorne, Amelia, and Lionel Carver, in the library. The fire crackled, throwing crimson reflections across their strained faces. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot announced, "the arrest of Monsieur Vale was premature. He is guilty of forgery, of writing the threatening note, of staging the dagger to create confusion, but he did not administer the poison." A stunned silence greeted this. Poirot continued. "The true murderer acted earlier, during the banquet itself. The digitalis was introduced not in the study brandy, but in Sir Reginald's wineglass at table, over the course of the evening in small doses that would accumulate fatally." He held up the ebony box containing the second dagger. "This was found in the vault, with a note from Sir Reginald accusing Vale, but the vault key hangs in Lady Victoria's private sitting room. Only someone with constant access could have taken the duplicate dagger and planted it in the study after death." All eyes turned to Lady Victoria. She sat very straight, face pale as marble. Poirot's voice softened. "Madam, you knew of your husband's intention to recognize Amelia as his niece and heir. You knew it would displace you almost entirely. During dinner, you passed the salt, the sauce, the wine, many opportunities to add a few drops from the vial you had obtained from Dr. Thorne's bag earlier in the evening." Lady Victoria's composure shattered. "He humiliated me for years," she cried. "Paraded that girl in front of everyone. I endured his affairs, his rages, his threats to leave me penniless. And then to give everything to a bastard child." Amelia gasped. Poirot raised a hand. "Not bastard, madame. Legitimate niece. Eliza married secretly before her supposed death." Lady Victoria laughed bitterly. "It makes no difference. He was going to cast me aside." Dr. Thorne spoke for the first time, voice shaking. "I gave her the vial. She said it was for her own nerves, I suspected, but I said nothing. Poirot turned to him. You suspected, yes, and when Vale's forgeries threatened exposure, you encouraged suspicion to fall on him. But the true crime was yours by omission, and Madame's by commission. Lady Victoria rose suddenly. For a moment Poirot thought she would flee, but instead she walked to the window, staring out at the rain-swept gardens. I thought the dagger would make it look like an intruder, she said dully. I took the duplicate from the vault weeks ago, waiting for the right moment. After he collapsed in the study, I stabbed him, then screamed to bring the household running. She turned back, eyes hollow. Do what you must, monsieur. Poirot signalled to the constable waiting outside. As Lady Victoria was led away, Amelia buried her face in her hands, sobbing, not for the uncle she had barely known, but for the wreckage of lives the truth had revealed. Later, alone in the Crimson Vault, Poirot stood before the family ledger. He turned to the final entry, written in Sir Reginald's hand only days before his death. To my niece, Amelia Fairchild, I leave the entirety of my estate. Blood calls to blood. Poirot closed the book gently. The echoes from the Crimson Vault had spoken at last, voices of greed, of betrayal, of love distorted into hatred. And beneath them all, the quiet, persistent voice of truth that Hercule Poirot had listened for from the beginning. Upstairs, the great house seemed to exhale, as though relieved of a long-carried burden. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a pale moon silvered the wet gardens. But the crimson stains, on carpet, on conscience, on memory, would never entirely fade. Chapter 7. The Scarlet Web. Unravels. The library of the Crimson Banquet Hall felt smaller that evening, as though the walls themselves had drawn closer to witness the final unravelling. The fire in the grate burned low, casting long crimson shadows that danced across the faces of the assembled company. Lady Victoria Hawthorne sat rigid in an armchair, wrists bound with a policeman's cord, though her posture remained regal. Dr. Elias Thorne occupied the opposite chair. Shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the carpet. Amelia Fairchild stood near the window, pale and silent, while Lionel Carver leaned against the mantelpiece, arms crossed, watching everything with grim satisfaction. Hercule Poirot stood in the centre of the room, small and precise, the only calm presence amid the storm of emotion. Inspector Japp waited by the door, ready to take notes, though he already suspected the outline of what was coming. Poirot cleared his throat. Mesdames et messieurs, he began quietly, the time has come for clarity. The murder of Sir Reginald Hawthorne was not the work of a single hand, but of a web, scarlet, tangled and carefully spun. Tonight we shall cut through every thread. He moved to the long table that had been brought in from the dining hall. Upon it lay the evidence, the poisoned wine-glass, the ruby-handled dagger, the threatening note in block capitals, the second dagger from the vault, the vial of digitalis, the bent earring, the blood-stained glove, and, most damning, a small ledger page recovered from the artist's room, showing payments from Sir Reginald for artistic services rendered. Poirot lifted the poisoned glass first. First, the poison, digitalis, administered in small doses throughout the banquet. Who had opportunity? Everyone at the table. But who had motive, means, and knowledge? He turned to Dr. Thorne. You, docteur, supplied the drug. You knew the exact dosage required to kill without immediate suspicion. You had access to the wine during service, as you passed the decanter several times, and you had reason to fear exposure. Sir Reginald had begun to question your inflated fees for discreet services. Thorn's voice cracked. I never meant to kill him. I only diluted the prescription. I thought it would make him ill, force him to rely on me more. Poirot raised a hand. You diluted nothing, monsieur. You strengthened it. The vial found in the secret passage bears your fingerprints. You acted not alone, but in concert. He turned to Lady Victoria. You, madame, were the architect. For 20 years you endured a marriage of convenience, watching your husband grow infatuated with a young girl, his own niece, though you did not know it then. When he announced changes to the will, you understood the fortune would pass to Amelia, leaving you with little more than a widow's pension. You could not bear the humiliation. Lady Victoria lifted her chin. I did what any woman would do to protect her position. Poirot inclined his head. You obtained the concentrated digitalis from Dr. Thorne. During dinner, while the lights were out, you slipped several drops into your husband's goblet. The darkness was your ally, the confusion your shield. Later, in the study when he collapsed, you finished the work with the dagger, using the duplicate from the vault, which you had taken weeks before. She said nothing, but her eyes blazed. Poirot continued, lifting the threatening note. This note, you will pay tonight, was not written by Julian Vale, as I first believed. The practice sheet in the wastepaper basket belongs to you, madame. Your hand, when forced into block capitals, betrays the same flourish on the Y. You wrote it after the murder, placing it on the desk to suggest passion, revenge, an intruder. You wished us to look everywhere except at the wife who had poisoned her husband at his own table. A low murmur ran through the room. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. Poirot picked up the second dagger. The duplicate weapon was a brilliant touch. You planted it in the study after death, then screamed to summon witnesses. But you overlooked one detail, the vault key. It hangs in your sitting room, and the safe combination is your wedding date. Only you could have taken the second dagger without raising suspicion. He set the dagger down gently. Yet there remains Monsieur Vale. He is guilty of forgery, of blackmail, of staging the scene to protect himself. He wrote the note, yes, but only after discovering the body. He believed Sir Reginald had been killed by another, and he wished to direct suspicion away from himself. He took the opportunity of the blackout to slip the note onto the desk, hoping it would point to a crime of passion rather than poison. Vale, still in custody in the next room, had already confessed this much under questioning. Poirot turned to Lionel Carver. You, monsieur, were the loudest accuser, the most obvious suspect. Yet your alibi, though imperfect, holds. You were in the billiard room. The footman confirms it. Your motive was financial, but you lacked the intimate knowledge of Sir Reginald's heart condition. You were a red herring, useful but not essential. Carver exhaled, almost in relief. Finally, Poirot addressed Amelia. Mademoiselle, you were the innocent centre of the web. Your uncle intended to make you his heir, to right the wrong done to your mother. You knew nothing of the poison, nothing of the dagger. The earring you lost during the blackout was genuine. The bent clasp the result of nervous clutching. Your sleeping powders were taken to calm your nerves after the evening's tensions, not to harm anyone. Amelia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Poirot stepped back, hands clasped behind him. The scarlet web is complete. Lady Victoria planned the murder, using Dr. Thorne's drug and her own hand to deliver the final blow. Dr. Thorne supplied the means, hoping to profit from the aftermath. Julian Vale attempted to cover his tracks, adding confusion. The rest were merely caught in the threads. He looked at Lady Victoria. "You will be taken to London to face justice, madame. The charge will be murder in the first degree with premeditation." Lady Victoria rose slowly. For the first time, her mask slipped completely. "I loved him once," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Before the diamonds, before the railways, before the other women. When he chose to replace me with a child who looked like his dead sister, I could not forgive." She allowed the constable to lead her away without resistance. Dr. Thorne followed, head bowed, muttering something about professional disgrace. The room emptied until only Poirot and Amelia remained. The girl looked at him with eyes full of sorrow and confusion. "Will I inherit everything?" she asked. Poirot regarded her kindly. "That will be for the courts and the executors to decide. But Sir Reginald's last wish was clear. Blood calls to blood." Amelia turned to the window, where the moon had broken through the clouds, silvering the rain-wet lawns. Outside, the sound of car engines faded as the prisoners were driven away. Inside, the fire died to embers. Poirot stood for a long moment, looking at the table of evidence. Then, with a small sigh, he gathered the pieces one by one, placing them carefully in a box. The scarlet web had been cut. Yet, in the quiet of the great house, the echoes of betrayal lingered, faint but persistent, like the scent of dying roses in a crimson room. Chapter 8. Dawn after the Crimson Night. The morning after the final revelations broke clear and cold over the Wiltshire hills. Frost silvered the lawns of the Crimson Banquet Hall, and for the first time in days, the sun rose unhindered, its pale light pouring through the tall windows and turning the ubiquitous crimson draperies into something softer, almost rose. Hercule Poirot stood in the entrance hall, valise in hand, watching as the last police car crunched down the gravel drive. Lady Victoria Hawthorne and Dr. Elias Thorne had been taken to London under guard. Julian Vale would follow later that day. The house, so lately a stage for tragedy, now felt hollow, echoing with absence. Amelia Fairchild appeared at the top of the grand staircase. She had discarded her mourning black for a simple grey dress, and her golden hair was tied back with a ribbon. She looked very young and very tired. "Monsieur Poirot," she called softly, descending the stairs, "you are leaving." He bowed. "My work here is finished, mademoiselle. The truth has been served, though it brings little comfort." She reached the bottom step and hesitated. "I hardly know what to feel. My uncle, whom I barely knew, was planning to give me everything. And yet his death, all this horror, was because of me." Poirot shook his head gently. "No, mademoiselle. It was because of greed, of pride, of long-buried resentment. You were merely the mirror in which others saw their own fears. You are innocent." Amelia managed a small, tremulous smile. "The solicitors arrived this afternoon. They say the new will is valid. I shall inherit the estate, the house, everything." She looked around at the crimson walls, the crystal chandeliers, the vast spaces. "It feels like inheriting a tomb." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "but tombs can be transformed into homes. You are young. You have time to make this place your own, to let in light and air, to banish the shadows." She nodded slowly. "I think I shall begin by changing the colour scheme. No more crimson. Something lighter." "A wise decision," Poirot said with a twinkle. "Red is a colour of passion, but too much passion can be dangerous." Lionel Carver emerged from the breakfast room, coat over his arm. He paused beside them. "I'm off as well," he said gruffly. "Back to London. Hawthorne's death leaves the African railway deal in limbo, but I'll salvage what I can." He glanced at Amelia. "If you ever need advice on the business side, miss, you'll find me fair. Hawthorne and I had our differences, but I bear you no grudge." Amelia thanked him quietly. Carver tipped his hat to Poirot and strode out into the frosty morning. The great door closed behind him with a soft thud. Poirot turned to Amelia once more. "One final word, mademoiselle. Your mother, Eliza, she loved your uncle very much once, and in his own flawed way, he never forgot her. The wrong he did her haunted him to the end. By recognizing you, he tried to make amends. Honor that intention. Use the fortune well." Tears welled in her eyes. "I will try." A footman appeared with Poirot's overcoat and hat. The detective donned them with his usual precision, then offered Amelia his hand. "Adieu, mademoiselle. May the future bring you happiness to balance the sorrow of these days." She pressed his hand warmly. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for the truth and for your kindness." He stepped out onto the portico. His Daimler waited, engine purring softly. As the chauffeur opened the door, Poirot paused for one last look at the Crimson Banquet Hall. In the clear morning light, the house looked almost benign, its pointed gables sharp against the blue sky, its windows glittering like friendly eyes. The crimson ivy that climbed the walls had begun to fade with the approach of winter, revealing patches of honest grey stone beneath. Poirot climbed into the car. As it moved smoothly down the avenue of ancient oaks, he leaned back against the leather seat and allowed himself a small sigh of satisfaction. The case had been complex, layer upon layer of deception, motive tangled with motive, truth hidden beneath theatrical flourishes of blood and dagger. Yet, in the end, as always, order had emerged from chaos. The little grey cells had prevailed. He thought of Lady Victoria, proud even in defeat. Of Dr. Thorne, ruined by his own complicity. Of Julian Vale, whose artistic talent had twisted into crime. And of Amelia, inheriting not just wealth, but the responsibility to heal old wounds. Human nature, Poirot murmured to himself, twirling the end of his moustache. So predictable in its unpredictability. Greed, fear, love, the eternal motives. And always, always, someone believes they can commit the perfect crime. The car reached the gates and turned onto the country road. In the rearview mirror, the Crimson Banquet Hall grew smaller until it was no more than a red-roofed shape against the hills. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle motion of the car lull him. Somewhere ahead, London waited. Tea at his flat, perhaps a letter from Captain Hastings full of golfing triumphs, and undoubtedly another envelope sealed with scarlet wax, bearing an invitation to fresh mystery. He smiled faintly. The crimson night was over. Dawn had come at last. And Hercule Poirot, satisfied in the knowledge that justice had been done, travelled onward, ready as ever, for whatever puzzle the future might present to his incomparable little grey cells.